So in a moment, you will hear about the One Book, One Region initiative and its importance to our community. And then we'll introduce tonight's featured guests. After the discussion, there will be an opportunity to ask questions. And we could not have planned tonight's events without the support of our community partners. I'd like to thank Square Books, Connecticut College's Office of the President, Connecticut College's Office of Communications, the Goodwin Nearing Center for the Environment, the Frank Lewis Palmer Fund, Bank of America NA trustee, UConn Avery Point, and of course the Libraries of Southeastern Connecticut. At this time, I'd like to invite Christine Bradley, who is here representing One Book, One Region, to say a few words. Christine, will you come in?
Thank you, and thank you so much, Erica. I'm Chris Bradley, director of the Mystic and Noank Library, and one of the original One Book, One Region committee members. We always want to choose a book that you will enjoy reading. But over the years, the books have also been chosen to expand our horizons, spark discussion, and inform us about topics that can be timely, historical, and universal. Topics like immigration, the Holocaust, the criminal justice system, coming of age, the opioid epidemic, and disability rights. We've introduced both well-known and unknown authors, and each year they and their books have helped us to reach the goals of One Book, One Region, to bring the community together to discuss ideas, to broaden the appreciation of reading, and to break down barriers between people. We've sometimes struggled to find and agree on the right book, but this year's choice tackles topics that demand our attention. In the author's own words, it's the story of a breakdown in democracy, the disintegration of critical infrastructure due to inequality and austerity, environmental injustice that disproportionately affects the poor, and the abandonment of civic responsibility and our obligation as human beings to care and provide for one another. Dr. Hannah-Attisha's What the Eyes Don't See is about the collapse of honesty, transparency, good government, and respect for scientific truth. A lot to ask from a book, but we have every confidence in our readers and our communities to address tough issues once again through the power of just one book. And now, it is my pleasure to introduce a truly exceptional individual who will, in turn, introduce our distinguished guests. Mays Imad is an expert in the neurobiology of learning and an associate professor of biology at Connecticut College. Mays is an immigrant from Iraq who grew up in Detroit. Her research focuses on the social determinants of health and well-being. Let's all welcome Dr. Mays Imad.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, everyone, for joining me. I am Dr. Mays Imad. Today, we are honored to welcome a remarkable individual who embodies the profound journey of not just realizing a dream of becoming a physician, but also utilizing that achievement in the selfless service to humanity. The personification of determination, courage, and unwavering dedication to the truth. Dr. Mona Hanna-Attisha. A pediatrician, a scientist, a professor, and an immigrant raised in the vibrant city of Detroit. Mona is an exemplar of resilience and empowerment. Her deep-rooted Iraqi identity, intertwined with her rich cultural experiences, instilled in her a robust disposition to take on challenges much larger than herself. Her courage, grounded in the spirit of community resilience and intergenerational strength. A steadfast public health advocate, Dr. Mona unmasked the tragic circumstances enveloping Flint, Michigan, a crisis hidden in plain sight that robbed children of their future through poisoned water. Her fearless whistleblowing brought to light the dangerous levels of lead in Flint's water, a discovery which stemmed from her and her team's meticulous investigation of the lead level in the blood of the community's children. In the face of this silent epidemic, where signs of distress were concealed both within water and in the lives of the young, Mona was not only an advocate, but also a beacon of hope, a figure who uncovered a better truth with the hope to usher in change, healing, and justice. Her story, a poignant reminder of the immigrant narrative, echoes stories familiar to countless others. The story of leaving a homeland, sometimes forcefully due to unimaginable injustice, only to face yet another set of challenges. A passionate believer in public health and equity, her clarity of vision and purpose is indeed a guiding light in our times, reflecting the unyielding courage of every immigrant who dared, built, and risked everything for the promise of a better future. Dr. Mona brings to us not just a story of courage, but a powerful agenda of resilience, empowerment, and a transformative change. Please join me in welcoming a true hero in our midst, an icon of justice and hope, the indomitable Dr. Mona Hanna-Attisha.
Thank you.
I am pleased that joining Dr. Mona on stage tonight is our very own Dr. Julia Flagg, an associate professor of sociology and environmental studies at Connecticut College. Professor Flagg's research focuses on climate information use in the water sector and water quality violations. She has published extensive research related to climate change, disasters, and environmental justice. We are so grateful that she has agreed to lead this on-stage conversation with our speaker tonight. So please, won't you join me once again in thanking Professor Flagg and welcoming Dr. Mona Hanna-Attisha, while also giving the warmest and most enthusiastic welcome to your colleagues and the audience. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you so much for coming. Thank you so much for writing this book and for being the person that you are. I'm starting with a comment. I'm sorry. I don't think I've ever felt so simultaneously distressed and empowered in one book. And I just want to thank you for writing it and for honestly being who you are. So thank you.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you for the warmest welcome. It is great to be here with all of you. I'm so excited about this common region, which is atypical. It's usually just like the school or the region, but the school and the community together is wonderful, and I can see it in all of you. And thank you for the hospitality, and I'm so excited for this conversation. And is this filtered water? Is my first question. You will laugh tonight. No comment.
This is the interesting thing about water, right?
Right.
Our water systems are so invisible to us.
Yes.
That we don't, so many people, right, don't know how we get our water, where we get our water, what kind of water it is, who checks it before we get it, right? Yep. Such an invisible system.
Yep, which is why the book is called, one of the reasons it's called What the Eyes Don't See. Like, you don't often see what could be in your water. It's out of sight.
Yep, yep. I teach a senior level seminar on disasters, which I was telling you about before, and I assigned your book in this seminar, and I was thinking about how maybe not everyone would agree with that choice, right? To assign your book in that class. The Flint water crisis was eventually deemed an emergency, even a federal emergency, but it was ultimately not called a disaster. Why do you think this happened? And do disasters like what happened in Flint call on us as a society to rethink how we define a disaster?
Yeah, that's a really great question. It's something that we tackled during the crisis. We wanted to have a disaster declaration, because when you have a disaster declaration, it frees up local, state, and national resources. And that was kind of our first ask. So I will never forget when President Obama came to Flint. So in January of 2016, President Obama came, we declared a federal emergency. And he came to Flint, and I had like an hour with him, which was amazing. And I gave him 3 hugs. And anyways, so I said, I'm like, why can't we be declared a disaster? Like, why are we just an emergency? Like, why can't that, we free up all, like FEMA and all these different resources that come in when you're a disaster? And his answer was that we were not a natural disaster. This was a man-made emergency. And that difference is why we couldn't be a disaster. And I pushed back to the president. I'm like, hey, no, this is, this lots of disasters are caused, have man-made reasons they happened. Even the, what happened in Katrina could be traced back to, man-made errors in the dams and different things. So that was the reason that we could not be a disaster because of that designation. I don't think it's right, especially when you consider kind of the impacts of climate change and the increasing disasters that we have, and ultimately, they do have a cause where humans helped create this problem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. Something that distressed me as I was reading was how similar some of the events you talk about in the book sounded to other cases of environmental injustice or environmental racism. Things like citizens, typically parents and often mothers, noticing something wrong in the environment or with their children's health, those claims being discredited, bureaucratic and institutional delay to investigate and declare a problem, criticisms made against both the science and the scientist, etc. And yet, Dr. Paul Mohai, a scholar on environmental racism for the University of Michigan, and I believe one of your undergraduate professors, advisors, friends, has called what happened in Flint, quote, the most egregious example of environmental injustice and racism in his more than 3 decades studying the issue, unquote. What in your mind makes Flint different, more egregious than other cases of environmental inequality or environmental racism in this country?
That's a really great question. And, when I wrote this book, I wanted to share the story of what happened in Flint, which I also say is one of the most emblematic and environmental and public health injustices of our time. but once again, it's not the first. So I recently testified before Congress about the Infrastructure Act, about replacing lead pipes across the country, and I shared the Flint story and why we need to stop having Flint. We need to stop having these deja vu stories, the same kinds of things repeating. And when I testified, I said, Flint's crisis wasn't the first, and it wasn't the worst, and it wasn't the last. These injustices, these environmental injustices have been happening for a very long time. 30 years ago, I was an environmental studies student learning about environmental justice. And they were happening before then, and they've continued to happen. But what set Flint apart? What made Flint a national story? The students were a lot younger, but it was on the news for a long time. The national TV, once our work went public, it was a lot of people talked about it. It's in textbooks for children now. It is covered all over. And I think it's a combination of issues of why it was kind of this this signature disaster. I think it is because it wasn't just about what happened environmentally. There's so many other intersectional issues that I talk about in the book. Yes, it's about a water source that was changed and lead in the water that you couldn't see, and it was about activists speaking up and being dismissed and denied, and it was about denial of science, all these things that are common in so many environmental issues. But it was also the story about democracy. And I think this is a critical part of the story. Flint's democracy was usurped. Overnight, our local government lost control, and we were taken over by state-appointed emergency managers. And this wasn't just happening in Flint, it was happening throughout Michigan in majority-minority communities. At one point, half of our African-American population was under emergency managers, compared to just 2% of our white population. So after the water crisis was exposed, one of the emergency managers was subpoenaed, and he had to testify before Congress, before the Oversight Committee, before I forget his name, who passed away, Congressman Cummings, Elijah Cummings from Maryland, incredible hero, the head of the Oversight Committee, and he subpoenaed one of the emergency managers. And he asked him, he's like, people were coming to you with jugs of brown water and telling you that something was wrong. They were saying their kids were sick, and you weren't listening. Why? Why weren't you listening to people? And his response was something like, I didn't have to. I wasn't accountable to them. And so I wrote this book for many reasons, but also to share the story of what happens when we corrode our democracy, which is not a Flint story, which is now an everywhere story, where so many efforts are underway to take away people's voices, to take away their vote, to take away their seat at the table. And it often is taking away the voices of minority people. So that is part of the story of, I think, why this kind of became national news and people talk about it a lot. And one of the good things that happened, so yes, we were this terrible case of environmental injustice. Once again, environmental injustices have been happening for a long time. But one of the amazing positive ripple effects is now people are talking about environmental justice. It became part of the common lexicon. Presidential candidates started to talk about it and had platforms. We now have an EPA Office of Environmental Justice and Civil Rights with a huge budget. So some really, really awesome things happened because of Flint that triggered a greater awareness, largely of environmental justices. I'll say one more thing. We talked about its resonance in environmental justice. There's been folks who've read this book recently and are like, oh my gosh, this is just like what happened with COVID. So it's also the same lesson of public health injustices. It's about denial of science. It's about disinvestment in what keeps us healthy. It's about our lack of investment in public health infrastructure, like surveillance systems to do what we need to do. It's about inequality. Not all people are impacted by public health issues the same. So also a lot of the same lessons from what happened, but we all just went through with COVID.
Totally. Thank you. Thank you. It's related to my next question, which is about you know, in a lot of my classes, when we start talking about environmental inequality, of course, we come to the role of government, right? And is government friend or foe? And there is somewhat of a debate among environmental justice scholars about, you know, should we work with the state or against the state? And we follow your journey sort of with that through the book. You are an optimist throughout, which we love. We also see you really struggle against the state avoiding giving you the data to run the analyses, to keep talking about lead in paint rather than water, and numerous other things. So I just wonder if you can say a little bit more about this, you know, what has this experience taught you about the role of government in resolving or helping to mitigate environmental crises? And, you know, are there conditions, good conditions under which, right, government can be more of a friend than a foe?
Oh, that is such a great question, Julia. So I talk in the book of one of my first experiences with government. I was a high school student. I was in our environmental club, and we helped shut down an incinerator in the neighborhood. Like, there was this trash burning incinerator. Kids would wake up with like a layer of soot on their grass. It was on the car windows. Higher rates of asthma in that community. Adults would have more COPD. So, like, as a high school student in our environmental club, we like helped elect a state rep. And the first thing he did when he got to the Capitol in Michigan, in Lansing, was pass a law that you cannot operate an incinerator within a certain radius of a school. It was in the backyard of an elementary school. And it passed. And that was 30 plus years ago, and it's still shut down, this incinerator. So at this really like young, formidable age, I learned about the connection between environment and health. I learned about the power of youth activism. I learned about how you can elect policymakers who can truly serve as public servants and right historic wrongs and protect the health and the environment of a community. So that I was like 15, 14, like, and it had this like, you know, that was like this really foundational experience. And to this day, I am a believer in government. So many folks who hear the Flint story, they're like, failure of government at every single level. Like, yes, there was a failure of government at every single level. However, when government did get involved, the problem got fixed. So when our elected leaders, our U.S. Congresspeople, our U.S. senators, when they found out the scope of what was happening, and I talk about some of my heroes, Senator Stabenow, Congressman Kildee, when they found out what was happening, they never stopped fighting for Flint. At the national level. And for me, that was an affirmation of what good government can be. We then elected a new governor, Governor Whitmer in Michigan. Her very first executive order was from Flint. It was a whistleblower protection order. It was an executive order to encourage more whistleblowers in state government to raise concerns, because people are like, why weren't more government bureaucrats saying something? Like, they knew something was wrong. Why weren't they doing something? And a lot of the investigations that came forth afterwards really pointed to the culture in these bureaucracies, these cultures that were crippled by years, decades of austerity, attacks on government to have the ability, the capacity to do their work, and thus became very reactive and very kind of knee-jerk, you know, blaming the victims and not investigated and just giving permits and being reactive and not preventative. That's not what government is supposed to be like. Government is supposed to be proactive and preventative and responsive and transparent and representative, right? So we've been able to see some really good developments, at least in our state, in response to this, and also at the national level. I'm working on a new project, and I'm going to talk about just a little bit, where it's trying to rebuild the social contract. So there's like a relationship that you're supposed to have with government. Like, you expect your water to be clean, your air to be healthy, you expect to have these protections. And in Flint, that social contract was severed because of the water crisis, but it was kind of severed for our decades of neglect and crisis. So this new project I'm working on is called RX Kids. We are prescribing universal and unconditional cash allowances to every pregnant mom and baby in Flint. It's launching in January. It's never been done anywhere in the country for a whole city. We are going to eliminate infant poverty, and there's no means testing. It's not about a certain income. Everybody is getting this because this is how we're supposed to care for each other. This is us saying, we see you, we hear you. We're launching on Valentine's Day because it's about love, right? It is ultimately about love. This is how we are supposed to love each other and care for each other. We shouldn't shrug our shoulders when kids grow up and are born into toxic water or zip codes that predict their life expectancy. Like, we should be able to do something about it. Yeah. So this is another thing that we're trying to tackle, and people are like, you can't do this. I'm like, I'm doing this. I've already raised $40 million. I need another 15 million, so if any big donors, but it's launching, and the social contract, so the state has given us $16.5 million, and it's coming from the cash assistance program, and it is a complete new vision of how to care for each other. And this is how government should work, in this preventive, inclusive, holistic way that dignifies people rather than attacks them.
Amazing, amazing. Thank you. I wanted to ask about the word resilience. It's a word that appears throughout the text. It's been important in your own life and the life of your family. Resilience is an interesting concept, right? We need climate resilience. I tell my students to be resilient. I tell my daughter to be resilient. But resilient is a tricky concept, right? We're talking about a city that is a majority Black city. Calling on people to be more resilient seems deeply and historically unfair. And sometimes calling on people to be more resilient takes away blame from people and institutions that got us into a mess. Can you say more about what this concept means to you and its connection to the Flint water crisis?
Yeah, I think that is a really, really wonderful question, and something that I have thought about quite a bit. So a lot of the work that we are doing now in Flint, so from the moment of, we realized this population level lead exposure, this population level trauma, this is one more bad thing that happened on top of a population that was already kind of rattled with a lot of adversity and toxic stress. And we know the science of what that does to kids, especially in early childhood and their long-term development. And a lot of the science in early childhood and public health has really kind of been enamored with this word resilience. Let's just build more resilience in this population that's already been so oppressed. And ultimately, we are asking victims to do more. Mm-hmm. We are asking victims to do more. And that's how I feel a lot in Flint. We're throwing everything. Trauma-informed care and mental health services and Medicaid expansion and literacy programs and nutrition prescriptions, lots of really awesome things. Home visiting programs, early child care, lots of awesome stuff. That ultimately families have to sign up for and do, mm-hmm. And it's adding more to folks that are struggling with so much. And so when COVID started, the New York Times ran a series of articles called The America We Need. How do we build an America that's more resilient, more just, and more fair? And they asked me to write an article about what we should do for kids. Mm-hmm. And the title of my article was, I'm sick of asking children to be resilient. So how do we transition from asking people, kids, little kids, to be resilient, to building resilient communities, to building a resilient society, to building a resilient nation, so kids can just be kids. And that's kind of where I argued for things like, cash allowance programs and guaranteed income programs and stronger environmental protections and, higher minimum wages and, investments in public health. What can we do as a society, as a policy level, to buffer kids and to build more resilience at that level? So that's kind of where I have shifted because it is, it's racist and it's unjust, you know, to say like, oh, you have so much grit, you have so much resilience. Like in this New York Times article, there's a quote I include from this boy in Philadelphia who grew up in the projects, all his best friends were shot, and he went on to be a Rhodes Scholar. And he was celebrated. They're like, oh, look at this kid, he's so resilient. And his response was like, I should not have had to do any of this. Fix the systems, fix this, you know, all these other things so that I could just be a kid. And it's
Thank you. I was thinking about, as I was reading, how in lots of books about environmental crises, events, disasters, we really don't learn anything about the author or the author's life. And I loved learning about your family and your experience and your family's experiences. I really can't imagine now reading the book without hearing about Haji, your parents, your brother, your children, and more. Can you tell us why it was so critical to you to weave the autobiographical together with your retelling of the Flint disaster?
Thank you. So writing a book was really hard, like maybe harder than medical school. It was really hard. But part of the process was I sent it to a lot of subject matter experts to make sure I got like the Michigan history right and the Iraq history and the labor history, and there's a lot of rabbit holes in this book. So I sent it to a friend of mine at Columbia who's a lead historian. Like he is the lead expert, like he's written books about lead history. I'm like, David, can you read this? Can you make sure I got all the lead stuff right? And I didn't hear from him. And I'm like, okay, what's going on? Like, did you read it? He's like, I skipped all the lead stuff. I just cared about the family personal stuff. I'm like, what? He's like, no, the lead stuff was okay, but like that stuff was exciting. So that was never going to be part of the book. Like when first of all, like I didn't never expected to write a book. Like that's not why I went to medical school. But then again, I never expected that I was going to be at the center of this like emblematic, you know, environmental and public health crisis. And I said no for a long time. People, like when it became a national story, people were like, you need to tell your story. I'm like, go the F away. Like I'm so busy. Like I have neglected my family. Like there is no way that I'm going to write a book. And people, like I've heard like agents, I'm like, what is an agent? And publishers and all these people are coming, I'm like, go away. And then I was at an event in Washington, D.C., and I met somebody who became my editor. And I was receiving a recognition, and this guy came up to me, and he told me about the other books that he has brought to life. And I'm going to share some of them. Born a Crime by Trevor Noah, Between the World and Me by Ta-Nehisi Coates, and Just Mercy by Brian Stevenson, and Ibram Kendi's book. So he runs this division in Penguin Random House, which is a publishing company that is committed to social justice stories and committed to diversity in literature. So all of his authors are people of color, and he only works with authors on a social justice story. And so he told me who he was and who he like has worked with. I'm like, oh my God, I love these books. Like these are amazing authors. Like, and that's how I said yes. So I said yes to him that I would write a book. And when I committed to writing a book, it was just going to be the Flint story. It was just going to be like me as this doctor at the center of this crisis. And within chapter 1, like within like writing, just beginning, I realized that it was impossible to tell you the Flint story without telling you who I am and where I came from. Where's Maze? I can't see you. So my story is an immigrant story, and it's about this girl who wasn't supposed to be in this country. I wasn't supposed to be here. I left somewhere, that my parents didn't want to leave but had to. And I came here for that American dream. I came here for freedom and opportunity and democracy. And when I came here, Lady Liberty's arms were wider open. And that allowed kind of my, who I was to be more celebrated and welcomed. And by and large, that enabled me to grow up confident and competent, but also very committed to service. I, to this day, wake up every day grateful to be in this country because I had first cousins back home who were in air raids and shelters and sanctions and, war after war. So that immigrant perspective made me committed to service, pushed me to medicine, pushed me to working in places like Flint and Detroit. And in some way, I feel gave me this heightened antenna for injustice. There's a scene in my book about when I was like 10 or 11 years old, and my father showed me a picture from Hannah-Attisha, where the chemical weapons attack, where Saddam Hussein woke up that day and he gassed an entire village of Kurds, and 5,000 people died that day. And he showed me this picture of this beautiful baby boy lying on the ground next to his father. And I was 10 or 11, and I don't think he should have showed me that picture. Like, I was like I had nightmares for a long time, but it taught me that people in power could take advantage of vulnerable populations. And then, like, flash forward 30 years later, I'm in a city that's been poisoned, you know, and I have to do something about it, not the same. So it was important for me to share that immigrant perspective, to share that how being an immigrant, for me, it's like a superpower to be an immigrant. And this book came out in a time where we were questioning the role of immigrants. It came out in a time when we were talking about bans and walls. And to this day, there's little girls that look just like me that want to come here for the same reasons that me and my family came here, and they can't come here anymore. So that became an important part to share. And then I also, there's a lot about like being a mom and a wife and taking care of kids and going to Girl Scout meetings and soccer games and taking care of a husband and all this different stuff. And that was included because I'm just like you. Like, you have a 5-year-old you couldn't tuck in today, Like, my kids are texting me right now. So, like, we are... they're fighting over their clothes. So they're teenagers now. It's the worst. So, putting that personal in there was to show you that I'm not any like superhero special person who did this work. I am just like you. And if I can do this work, you can do this work. So it was to make it as relatable as possible.
So your book was published about 5 years ago. The events recounted in the book take place almost a decade ago. My students and I, when we were talking about your book yesterday, were wondering, what are you seeing today in children's health and in the communities that you continue to work with in Flint?
Oh, that's a great question. So, right away we knew understanding the science of lead, understanding the science of trauma. These are things that don't present right away. The manifestations of this don't present right away. We knew that we would need to do longitudinal support. So we advocated from the onset to build something like a registry, and we were able to get funding from Congress. It took us 1.5 years to get funding to build the Flint registry. That funding went to the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control. We're on year 7 of the Flint registry. It was modeled after the World Trade Center registry, which is on like year 1920, of following folks and supporting those victims. There's lots of other kind of environmental exposure registries. It's important to see how people are doing at a population level. I still see patients. I was in clinic this week. But you don't want to know how my patients are doing, because that's just like 1 or 2. The sample size is small. You want to know how the population is doing. That's epidemiology. That's what a registry is for. So this is a voluntary registry. We've been able to enroll over 20,000 people, which is really amazing considering how trust was really broken. And the registry isn't just surveillance. It's not just how people are doing. We see how people are doing, but then we connect them to services, to early childhood programs, to mental health care, to developmental services, to environmental, risk mitigation, all these different things. So we've been able to make about 30,000 referrals to improve the public health of the community. Since we've been on our feet, we've also been able to be a resource for other communities. Our registry is now being modeled for folks in Hawaii, where there's the Red Hill disaster, where there's jet fuel for the military and these underground tanks leaked into their groundwater. Kids were drinking jet fuel. and they were denied and dismissed for a long time, and it was even harder going up against the military. So they just got funding for their registry, which is being modeled after our registry. So how are people doing? So the data from this registry shows that, you know, people are struggling. The kids, there's like a 70% ADHD rate, which is related to lead. Adults have high rates of hypertension, which is related to lead. Lots of referrals for developmental needs. But like most environmental issues, it's very difficult to prove causation, which is why often environmental culprits have evaded accountability. There's a time lag between exposure to when you have symptoms, so it's very difficult to prove causation. So we're not trying to prove causation, we're just trying to support people. So we're trying to use early identification to then support people. But a lot of the results on how people are doing can be found on our Flint Registry website. We do this work with community. Our staff is from the community. It's all done in humble partnership like most public health should be. And especially important in Flint. So remember, this was a democracy story. People's voices weren't heard. Part of recovery is participatory democracy and self-determination. So all of our work is done together. We listen. I have a director of community engagement on my team. I have a group of parents that advise me, our parent partners, and I have a group of children that advise me. They named themselves the Flint Youth Justice League. They're amazing. They're a badass group of kids. And we go to these meetings, and I don't talk, which is shocking because I love to talk, but I just listen to these kids who tell us what we should be doing and where we should be going. And they've helped advise other communities. So shortly after Flint, there was a water crisis in Newark, New Jersey, not far from here. And our Flint kids were Zooming with kids in Newark and telling them what a part pavilion was and how to sample water and how to remove aerators from your tap. Our kids are amazing. So, you know, once again, doing this work, which is so important in all communities, but especially communities where there have been such deliberate efforts to make it hard for people to have their voices heard.
Absolutely. I have so many more questions. I'm going to limit myself to one so that we can open it up. But I want to ask you one more question about your family. And I was sort of thinking, you know, if the physics of space and time didn't exist and you could have a conversation with your maternal grandfather, Haji, or your distant cousin, Dr. Paul Shekwana, what do you think they would say to you about the work that you did, or what would you say to them?
That's a great question. I'm going to pick another relative, so no offense to the other ones, but I also talk about my great uncle Nouri in the book, and he came to MIT to study in the 1930s, got kicked out of school because he became an activist, went back to Iraq and created an organization in Baghdad called the Association Against Imperialism and Fascism. Like, who wouldn't join that now? He fought for Palestine's independence from British rule. He was always fighting one fight or another. He had tons of fake names because he was always fleeing the authorities. And then I talk about this in the book, he went from Baghdad to Spain and he fought in the Spanish Civil War with the international brigades, against fascism and Franco in the beginning of World War II. And because he had been at MIT for a little bit, he was clumped with the Americans. He was in the Abraham Lincoln Brigades. I love this story because it is about risking everything. He risked his life for something bigger than himself. It wasn't about race or religion or country. It was about freedom and opportunity and this vision of what the world should be. So I loved hearing about him when I was a kid, and my mom would always say he had a tattoo. I'm like, he had a tattoo? I'm like, that's crazy. I thought that was the most crazy thing about him. But during the research of this book, I actually got his file from the Spanish Civil War. We finally used one of his fake names, and it was under one of his fake names, and I got his full file and his photo, which is in the book. But I wish, so I included that story to show kind of this long history of social justice, like, that my family has, that was passed down through oral history. And I would love to talk to him, and I think he'd be proud. Like, I think he'd be like, yeah, way to continue the line of resistors and fighters and defiant folks out there. So it's been wonderful to be able to kind of celebrate these folks in my personal history, which are in all of our histories, And I think part of writing this book was really kind of thanking the giants whose shoulders I was able to stand on, folks I've met and folks I never met. One of those, like, for example, I talk a lot in this book about Alice Hamilton. She's one of my heroes. She's like, a century ago, she was an expert on lead. She went after General Motors when they were putting lead in gasoline, the first woman professor at Harvard, like an amazing hero, which many people don't know about. So, I stand on her shoulders, and I stand on so many shoulders of folks who have enabled me to do this work.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Julia. Thank you.
Can you please join me in another round of applause? That was really amazing, wonderful conversation. So I now have the pleasure of being able to invite some questions from the audience. There are 2 microphones on either side of the aisle here. If you are able, please feel free to come up and ask some questions. I'll do some time managing, so I may, I'll give a little bit of a signal and a little bit of a direction when we are getting close to the end of our time for questions. But thank you so much, Dr. Mona, for what you've shared with us, and I really look forward to this piece of our program as well, this piece of engagement. So it looks like we have a question to start us off.
Yeah. Hi, can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm a bit nervous. Hi, Dr. Attisha. My name is Dina. I'm a sophomore here at Con, repping Michigan.
Yay! Go Blue! Awesome!
Yeah. So I am, well, before I ask my question, I just want to say thank you for sharing both your personal journey, like, with your career, your personal life, and with Flint. Not just to show us what it means to be a leader, but for inspiring students like me who would like to be able to fill your shoes one day. Yay. I'm also on the pre-medical track, so thank you for writing your book.
Thank you.
So not only are you a pediatrician, but you're also the director of the pediatric residency program at the Hurley Medical Center. And so you're a physician, but you're also an educator. And I was wondering, do you think that those 2 words, physician and educator, are interchangeable? And if not, do you think that we need to work towards making them interchangeable?
That's a great question. So it was asking, so I'm going to repeat all the questions. I'm a physician. I'm also an educator. Do I think those words are interchangeable? And if not, should they be? Absolutely. I wear many hats I'm a clinician, I see patients, I'm an educator, I'm a researcher, I'm an advocate. Those are all in my job description. And not all doctors wear all hats, but many doctors wear all of those hats. And people are like, you shouldn't have spoken up, you shouldn't have been an advocate. That's part of my job description, is to be an advocate. I was trained on how to be an advocate, and I was also trained on how to be an educator. So physician educators not only are teaching the next generation of physicians, but we're also teaching families and patients. That's part of our job, especially as pediatricians. So much of my work is being a good educator, communicator to families. So that is definitely a field in medicine, as a physician educator, clinician educator, and that is absolutely something you can do. We were talking earlier, I love being an educator. I love being a professor. I love teaching. Just like I'm sure why so many other folks here love teaching. It keeps you on your toes. It's exciting, but it is about impact. I hope that my learners go out and do better than me. It's multiplicative, your role when you are involved in education, and it's so much fun.
Thank you.
It's almost as fun as seeing little kids. It's so much fun.
Thank you. And we'll take a question from this side.
Yes, thank you very much for being here this evening. Do you see parallels to what happened in Lahaina, Maui, with the indigenous Hawaiians being greatly affected by the devastating fires, and also Palestine, Ohio, and the train derailment?
Yeah, that's a great question. Parallels between some of our recent disasters. Palestine, Ohio, lots of parallels. And we were actually also working closely with that community to help advise them, especially in terms of kind of the emergency response and doing longitudinal surveillance, because exposure to these kinds of things will need long-term support. In terms of what happened in Hawaii, I mentioned the one crisis in Hawaii already, Red Hill, which is a lot of parallels of science denial and a disproportionate population being impacted, and lots of parallels there of that environment, water issue. And in terms of what happened recently in Lahaina, I hope I'm saying that right, with the fires, the wildfires. I think that's a climate change story, which is similar. It's also about our inaction, our decades of inaction to do something about climate change, and its disproportionate impact that it will have on majority-minority communities. We're already seeing it. Climate change is an environmental injustice issue. It already around the world is impacting some of our most vulnerable populations. It will also impact children the worst, and it already has. So it's another environmental injustice. So many parallels. I'm sure you can probably speak more to the Lahaina issue. Oh, climate.
Yeah. Sorry, I was.
She didn't know. She was going to pick that.
I'm sorry. I was soaking up every word. It's another case in my mind where we know where Lahaina was vulnerable to a wildfire, and that information was known, and switching, I just think about the activists who knew immediately that the Flint River was a bad choice, right?
Yeah.
It was not a good move.
Yeah.
Local people knew, right?
Yeah.
So it just reminds me about how much, going back to what you were talking about, the absence of democracy in these cases, or talking to folks on the ground who know where there are problems today, or problems that could be in the future, is a problem with our democracy, I think.
And they're also both stories of disinvestment in infrastructure. Flint and the nation, we haven't invested in the upkeep of our infrastructure, be it roads or bridges or our pipes or what have you. And this was an electrical grid issue too. There was not a disinvestment and lack of upgrades that were supposed to happen. What happened in Libya with the floods, the people knew, the dams, or I forget, they knew that there was disinvestment, that this was going to happen. It was going to be predicted. And that 5,000 people died because of that. So we have not built climate resilient infrastructure that is going to be ready for all these things.
Yeah.
Thank you. This side.
Hi, I'm Ellis. I'm a first year here. And I once again wanted to say thank you, because this was one of the first summer reading books I've actually enjoyed.
Yay, Ellis! Woohoo!
So it feels to me that we as college students are sort of at the forefront of student activism, and you mentioned student activism before, but I think a lot of people, including myself, don't know how to get involved necessarily. So what is your best advice as a person who is around this world for a student like me and many of the students here in this room to get involved in student activism?
Yes, Ellis, that's an awesome question. Yes. If you think about the movements that are happening now, climate change, gun violence, Black Lives Matter, they are being led by young people. Your generation is sick of the status quo and is making noise and demanding justice. And there are so many things that you can do. So I have a bit of advice, because when I hang out with young people, you guys care so much. You do. You guys care so much. But I can also see how it can be like overwhelming. Like, and there's a lot of talk about like climate anxiety and like all these different things. Like there's so much going on. And you like, you know, what is it? Doom scrolling. Like there's like badness. Like there's a lot of stuff going on. So my first bit of advice is to find your passion. Okay, find like the thing that you care about. So like, you know, what keeps you up at night? Like what is your thing? Like me, like it's kids. Like kids are my why. It is what grounds me. It is what energizes me. Like that is my passion. Like, but so find your thing. Is it women's rights? Is it immigration? Is it climate change? Is it democracy? Is it vote? Like what? Find your thing, okay? So find your passion. That's my first bit of advice, because I think if there's so much, it gets overwhelming. My second bit of advice for folks is find your people. Find your peeps, okay? So in my book, my best friend was an engineer. Like, what? Like, I know, I never thought I'd hang out with an engineer. Like, they care about kids. Like, yeah, who knew? Like, they cared about kids too. So find somebody, find your people who also care about what you care about. Do not shoulder the burden of your passion alone. There's folks out there that have been caring about some of these issues for a long time, and they may not be in your same major or your same discipline, and they shouldn't be, because these issues are intersectional, and we need all kinds of people from all kinds of backgrounds so they can ask all kinds of questions and come up with some really amazing solutions. So find your people, find your peeps, find your village. You also really need a people like your peeps, because like I shared in this book, like one of the reasons I did not want to write a book is like, it's not about one person, it's about a team. And you need your team, because sometimes like you're on the ground and they lift you up, and sometimes you're feeling bad and you need to be there to lift them up. So a team, as cheesy as it sounds, a team is important. So find your passion, find your people, and my next P bit of advice is be prepared. So a lot of my story there was a lot of serendipity in my story. Like I had met somebody before, and then I contacted them, and you know, I had done something that enabled something to happen. So being prepared is what you're doing right now. Going to this lecture is preparing you for a chance where you're going to have to use your voice and your skills. I was lucky that I had taken research classes, and I knew epidemiology, and I had done things like advocacy training, and I had given an interview once on TV, and I had done theater, so I knew how to be a public speaker. Yes. So all of these things prepare you for these opportunities. So college is the best time. You guys are at an amazing place with so many resources. Take a public speaking class, take a theater class, take a marketing class, take a history class, take a humanities class, try to get as well-rounded of an education as possible, because having that kind of breadth and depth enables you to solve these different problems. So find your passion, find your peeps, and be prepared. And my last P, I know I said it wasn't gonna be, my last P is be persistent, okay? So change does not happen overnight. So I helped get the Infrastructure Act passed, which included the largest investment in water, and it's replacing the lead pipes across the country. There's been people that have been working on this before I was born, but there was this window of opportunity, and we jumped through that window, okay? So change and policy change, it happens in windows, but you have to stay persistent. And I like to talk about this in the book, pleasantly persistent, like annoying, but like be persistent. Whether you want to change the food in the cafeteria, or you want to change some sort of law, be persistent. So I'm going to repeat that, everybody. So find your passion, find your people, be prepared, and stay persistent. Those are my P's. That's my advice.
Thank you.
You bet.
Okay, we have time for 2, maybe 3 more.
I'm so sorry. I'll be shorter in my answer. There's too many P's.
Okay. So we're on this side.
Can I go ahead? Your book, I think, had a little bit of a Marvel mystery vibe to it, where it was pretty easy to see who the heroes were and who the villains were. Just on the hero note, I think, probably all of us want to commend the women who lived in Flint, Michigan.
Girl bosses.
Yeah. So,
Every environmental story. It's the moms.
I just want to throw a couple technical questions at you. You know, do you think that the EPA's reactionary movement to revise the lead copper rule, the LCRR, do you think that Flint is actually performing that and doing the inventory of lead lines and dissimilar metal lines? And second part, do you think that they're working to secure the funding to enable them to replace all the service lines right to the customer's tap?
Sure. So Michigan adopted a model lead and copper rule after Flint. So we have a lead and copper rule that exceeds federal standards, which calls for the inventory. People don't even know what kind of lines they have. This is also part of the national new revised lead and copper rule, that people need to know what kind of line is coming to their house. Michigan also mandates the replacement of all our lead lines in the next 20 years, which exceeds federal standards. And we changed how we sample for water, taking a first liter and a fifth liter to make sure we get the greater contribution from a lead line. So that actually is better than the revised lead and copper rule, which I hope is still under revision, because it's not good enough. It doesn't mandate the replacement of lead lines, which it needs to do. The funding has been the issue, but with the Infrastructure Act, it was the largest federal investment in water infrastructure ever, but it's still not enough. It's still not enough money for municipalities, which are cash strong, which often rely on a tax base to be able to do these upgrades, which we've neglected to do for decades.
Thank you. And do you think, like on the treatment side, do you think the EPA should mandate that they should do a corrosion control optimization study? Because I know corrosion control was the reason, you know, when they threw it out the window, that we did have the lead problem there. But I wonder if now, since the industries have moved from like just purely application of alkalis to more sophisticated phosphates and percentages, I wonder if they should mandate that Flint does like, you know, specific corrosion control optimization using coupons and the whole scientific end of that.
Yeah, I think to be as least wonky as possible, like I think we should always do things to err on the side of prevention. I think we should, you know, look at the science, make sure that things are going to work before they are instituted. So always doing things that are more preventative.
Thank you very much.
You bet. A little wonkiness for everybody in water science.
This side?
Yeah, hi, I'm a freshman. My name is Jack. I just want to say thank you for coming. I enjoyed the talk.
Thanks, Jack.
My question's kind of long and kind of sciencey, but I'll try to go through it somewhat quickly. So I'm just going to read it.
Go for it. You got this.
Obviously, lead is still quite a large threat, especially when it appears in places we never thought to look. I recently read something about out of like 28 dark chocolate bars that were sampled, 28
worst.
of them
I love dark chocolate.
Contained heavy metals, and I like chocolate, so that's a shame. That's unfortunate.
And baby food. Keep going.
Besides lead, there are other pollutants, and I use that term very loosely, such as PFASs, heavy metals, fluoride in drinking water, although that's controversial, pesticides, Teflon nonstick coatings, paraffin, and phthalate-based scented candles, and the list continues. So just on the note of PFASs, I didn't know if you were aware of this, but like earlier this year, 3M had a $10 billion settlement.
Not enough.
For
not enough.
Contaminating water with PFASs that I guess came from like firefighting foam and other things like that, and non-stick coatings as well. So I guess my question, and then to connect to your book and your work in terms of using lead-contaminated drinking water for formula for infants, studies seem to indicate that microwaving formula in plastic bottles leaches a lot of PFASs, which linger in your body. That's why they're called forever chemicals. They're hormone disruptors, and they're not excreted. They're linked to many cancers. They're found in
they're bad.
Found in the crotch regions of many, like Lululemon leggings.
The worst.
They cause malignancies. They, in terms of like drugs like carboplatin, the cancer drug for gynecologic malignancies, it seems to be increasing spontaneous immunity to it. So
all right, Jack, what's your question? Yep, get to it. You got it.
My question is, given how reliant the world is on plastics, especially given how, I guess, cheap and easy to produce they are, how do we address the health concerns of PFASs without doing something massive like trying to switch every single person off of, plastics and towards more inert substances that pose less of a health risk?
Whew, okay, great question. So there is a lot of bad stuff in our environment that we fail to regulate. And even when we find out they're bad, like we know PFAS and PFOA, all these chemicals are bad, they're still being used by the military, by firefighters, by different corporations. They're still out there. And these industries are largely held unaccountable for the pollution they've caused and the lifelong generational harm. So what do we do? How do we solve these problems, not just for PFAS, but for all over? We have to shift how we regulate toxins and poisons, and I talk about this in the book, and this is where Alice Hamilton comes into play. When GM was trying to put lead in gasoline, they made a deal with the Surgeon General. They said, if you can prove lead is toxic, we'll take it out. And that set forth this paradigm named after this GM scientist called the keyhole paradigm that assumes chemicals and poisons and toxins are safe until proven guilty, okay? This is not the criminal justice system. This is human environmental health. That paradigm has persisted to this day and has allowed for the unchecked use of thousands and thousands of chemicals and poisoned generations of people. We need to shift this paradigm to the precautionary principle, which is used in other countries, where we assume things are not safe until we prove that they are safe. So we can do this. We can shift how we regulate. We can not be beholden to special interests and corporations that have manipulated these regulations, that have attacked scientists, that have put doubt in science, and have made it really hard for us to be healthy. I will recommend a couple books. One is The Merchants of Doubt. The other one is The Triumph of Doubt, that talks about this industry playbook that has polluted the world and has made a lot of people really rich, and has kind of purposefully made public health regulations really weak.
Thank you.
You bet. All right, just one more question, but then we have to end on a positive note because that was depressing. Okay.
I'm gonna be honest, I'm not exactly the most positive person, but I think my question is not negative. Yeah, I'm kind of funny. Here, hi. My name's Wilson Mayberry. I'm a freshman, and the young man you were just talking with is Jack is my roommate.
Yeah, Jack. What do you guys do in your room? Yeah. Okay.
Wait.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh.
Go ahead, Wilson. Okay.
We're thinking of new ways to base. I don't know. In our room, we basically turn science fiction into science fact, basically.
Yes.
Well, mostly him. I'm not a science guy.
Okay, what's your question, Wilson?
Okay. How exactly do we hold these big corporations responsible for poisoning this world accountable?
Oh my goodness, how do we hold them accountable? What do you wish we do?
Well, the thing is, they basically control the government to an extent. They're like they're a bit like the invisible hand or something.
Okay, so we hold them accountable with lawsuits. So some of the biggest champions in this book, in our story, was the NRDC, the Natural Resources Defense Council, environmental lawyers, the ACLU, Environmental Defense Fund. So there are lawyers that go after them. What else do we do?
I guess we vote.
We vote.
Oh, yeah, we
right?
vote.
We vote.
But,
we vote.
Everybody start voting.
We vote. We vote for policymakers who believe in science, right? And have this who want to hold folks accountable.
Okay, just one last thing to add on that. What if the thing is that the system is kind of like the only people that are wealthy enough and have enough influence to be elected nowadays are basically people that are basically in the pockets of these big corporations. Like,
right.
I'm not going to name names, but I think you know who they are.
So we
I'm from Texas, so I think I'm joking.
Okay, we organize and we vote and we raise our voice. This is a story of the impossible, right? My story is this. We should not have been able to create the. Yes, it is a story of a crime that was committed with absolute indifference against some of the most vulnerable people in this country, to children. But I want you to go away recognizing that this story was also about saying no, about refusing to accept the status quo, about the power of what happens when we open our eyes and when we make friends and we build a team and we work with a community to create change on behalf of children. So go away recognizing that you can do the impossible. You can make the impossible possible. That's what we did, and that's what's happening all over the country. Don't say anything else because I don't want it to be negative.
Okay, don't worry. Don't worry, I'm not going to get negative.
Okay. Thank you, Wilson. Thank you. All right, so that was our last question for tonight. Thank you so much. The questions were incredible. What an incredible
We're going to do a
audience. What
selfie with everybody, though, okay?
engagement. Okay.
Are we ready? Ready, Julia? Ready, guys? All right, everybody say justice or something. Yay! Okay, all right, good.
All right, thank you so much, everyone. Thank you. I have one more thing to share with you before folks start flooding out. There is another opportunity to connect with Dr. Mona. There is a book signing that will happen in the lobby immediately following this moment. The books are here from Bank Square Books. You can purchase them. You can have your own signed. And Dr. Mona will give us, some of her time to do some signing of books. And we could thank her again for wonderful interaction. Thank Dr. Flagg for wonderful interview. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Absolute inspiration.